right, we've officially started recording. Hey everybody, this is Emmanuel, and this is sort of just a spontaneous video that I decided I wanted to do. It's not completely spontaneous because I've been thinking about recording this all day. It is going to be a little bit off the cuff though, although I have been thinking periodically about two of the topics that I want to be able to discuss in this video, which I was prompted to think of because of a recent conversation that I had with somebody that it made me think about wanting to record this video. But to start that off, I actually wanted to read something from this right here, the Monastic Diurnal. I'm personally a fan of the traditional Benedictine breviary, and I do what I can to make an effort out of praying this pretty often. So this morning, today is Tuesday, so it's divided, for every day of the week. I prayed from the Office of Prime this morning, and I think the page marker for that is right here. And there was a verse that stood out to me in one of the Psalms here, Psalm 7, which is relevant to what I wanted to talk about. Again, I'm just kind of mostly speaking from the heart here, so bear with me if I look like I'm trying to adjust my thoughts here. But the verse that stood out to me was this. Again, this is from Psalm 7, Tuesday, the Office of Prime, and the traditional Benedictine breviary, and it says, "Let the wickedness of sinners cease, and do thou support the just, thou God, who searchest the hearts and the reins." So that first part of the verse is actually what stood out to me more that's relevant to what I wanted to talk about. Let the wickedness of sinners cease, and do thou support the just. There was something that was said to me recently by a person who I know of, and without getting into the specifics of what it was about, the general idea that it raised questions about was whether or not it's acceptable to make this distinction between basically the just and sinners. Whether you're allowed to refer to people as righteous or unrighteous, just or unjust, and refer to a specific category of people as sinners. And this is clearly something that the scriptures have no qualms about. I mean, when you look throughout, especially the book of Psalms, there's constant references to making this distinction between referring to some people as being just and righteous, of being holy and faithful to God, and referring to some people simply by the title of sinners. And I think that two of the reasons why a lot of people are uncomfortable with this distinction, with using this kind of language that the scriptures have no issue with using, is, on the one hand, it has to do with the stigma of associated with the Pharisees, the self-righteousness of the Pharisees, where, when people think of the Pharisees, the first thing they think of is self-righteousness and their desire to want to be seen as holy in the eyes of men. And so a lot of people, I think, are uncomfortable with the idea that we would refer to some people as just and some people as sinners, because the first thing they think of is the Pharisees, who wanted to proclaim themselves as being good. And forgive me, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. And then, giving one of the best examples I can think of with that is where Jesus is picking up the stone when they're about to stone the woman who committed adultery, and he says to the Pharisees, "I'll give my stone to the first man who can claim that he's never sinned." So that kind of goes into the secondary thing that I think people are uncomfortable with about this, where they'll say, well, we're all sinners, so why do we have to have this separate category? What makes us think that we have the right to make any claims that anyone can be considered just when all of us are sinners? And I think that those two concerns are kind of connected to each other, the stigma of the Pharisees and just the fact that all of us are sinners. Oops, so he's making a little noise here. But if people are uncomfortable with this because their fear is that there's going to be a temptation towards self-righteousness, then I think that they're kind of missing the point when it comes to this. Because having self-awareness of your own goodness, self-awareness of your own sense of anything good and righteous that might be in you, it's not a justification for you to be boasting, for you to claim that you are suddenly higher than anybody else. Although it is true that we should esteem those who are more righteous than us. But it's not a justification for us to seek that out ourselves. It ultimately has to do with gratitude, with giving thanks to God, and recognizing that everything good that is in us comes from Him. And so when you have, verses like this, "Let the wickedness of sinners cease, and do thou support the just," there is a very clear recognition that there are people in this world who make it a priority to do the will of God, or at least strive to do that. They don't deny their own sinfulness when they do this, but they do recognize that they're supposed to follow God, and God recognizes their efforts as being just, and therefore recognizes those people as being just, as opposed to those who are not striving to follow the will of God. They would be recognized as simply as sinners. The scriptures have no issue with referring to that term exclusively to this group of people, even though all of us truly are sinners because of original sin. But I think that also, if there's something else I want to say about that, I'll go back to it in case I'm forgetting something, but that kind of ties into the second topic that I wanted to address in this video, which is on a misunderstanding of humility that I think a lot of people have, where kind of like with this fear that any sort of self-awareness of our own righteousness it is seen by some people as almost equivalent to self-righteousness, to pride, to a prideful recognition of one's own goodness. The people who are concerned with this sometimes make the mistake of thinking that humility is recognizing your own sinfulness and basically nothing more. They'll treat it practically as nothing more than, I know that I'm a sinner, and that's what they think humility is. And that really isn't a proper understanding of the virtue of humility when you take into account that the greatest of all of the saints, the Blessed Virgin Mary, she's the perfect example of humility, and yet she's the Immaculate Conception. She's without sin. So how would that definition apply to her? It doesn't. But you look into the prayer that she recited spontaneously with the Christ child in her womb, and one of the things that she says in there is, "For he has looked upon the lowliness of his handmaid." So Mary recognizes herself as lowly, even though she's not sinful. That, I think, is a much more proper understanding when we recognize that we're lowly insofar as we're creatures, and our existence is dependent upon God, our Creator. And everything good that we have in us, we recognize and we attribute that to God, who is the source of all goodness. So that would seem to be a much more accurate understanding of humility, where it's not just about this self-deprecating thought of recognizing our tendencies towards sin, but it's also, and perhaps even more so, recognizing that everything good that we have is something that we attribute to God, who gave it to us, who we could not have that without Him. And in that kind of recognition, in recognizing that, then we have a more proper understanding of what it really means to be humble, and we don't need to have any scruples, any concerns about being self-righteous if we recognize something in us that is praiseworthy, because there are things in ourselves that are praiseworthy, and there are likewise things in others that are very, very clearly not praiseworthy, or very clearly sinful. And of course, we should pray for them to be able to come to God and recognize Him as their creator. So, like I said, I kind of mostly did this as a little bit of an off-the-cuff video. I did think periodically throughout the day about some of these issues I wanted to say, talk about. If there's anything that I neglected to mention, maybe I'll just type it down below, any thoughts that I think I may have forgotten to say. But I'll go ahead and cut it off here, and I hope that you find this video to be edifying and enjoyable from someone lowly like myself, just trying to do good and promote uniformity with God's will. So whatever I can do to do the best that I can, I ultimately place my trust and confidence in God. Yeah. So this is Emmanuel Martinez. Coram Deo.